Writing a memorable piano riff rather than just having basic, boring chords is much easier than you might think. So in this video, I'm going to break down how to write a memorable piano riff in 3 super simple steps. Let's talk about it. So in case you didn't believe me that these are 3 easy steps, the first step is literally to pick a key. If you want me to make it even easier, you probably want to pick a key like C major, G major, F major, or perhaps D major. Basically, probably pick a key that is easy for you. If you want me to just give you the answer, or if you aren't a pianist or really don't know much music theory, you don't really even know what C major, G major, what any of that meant, then pick C major. Why? Because C major is just all the white keys. So all you really need to know for the rest of the video is just don't use any of the black keys, use all the white keys, and you're good to go. So the second step is to write a right hand hook. Now, a right hand hook can be a bunch of different things, but to keep it simple, we'll talk about 2 basic categories. The first is arpeggiated or broken chords. Arpeggiated or broken chords is probably exactly what it sounds like. It's just taking a chord and breaking it up instead of playing it all at the same time. So let's take a C major chord first. A C major chord is simply a C, E, and G, so played all together, and the default way you would probably think to play it is like this. So when we talk about arpeggiated or broken chords, we simply mean to play that one note at a time in a recurring pattern. So let's just go over a few examples of what this could look like. You could have a pattern where basically you just go up, or you could have a pattern that's just going basically down. Or you could have a different pattern where you actually start with a middle note and you do some up and down. There are literally, I believe, an infinite number of combinations when you think about all the different rhythms that you can use, the fact that you don't have to be stuck in 4/4 time. So basically just take a chord and break it up into an arpeggiated sequence or simply broken chords. So for instance, if your chord progression is 1-4-1-4, it could be something like this. And that is already a little bit more interesting than little bit more interesting, right? Next, we have melodic, which is really just anything that has a form of melody built in. Now, this could be something as simple as just a really, really simple melody and nothing else, like this. Or we could do something where we sort of chordify it, where we maybe have a note or two that we bounce off of, like this. Which really, that is the same thing as what we just did. The only difference is that after each melodic note, I then hit a G. Which, by the way, if you sort of want to do that style, something more melodic, and you want to have it be more than just a melody, 2 great things to do is to sort of bounce off of another note, which, by the way, if you do that, probably use the 1 or the 5 from your key. So the 1 is going to be what your key is named after. So in C major, the 1 is C, or the 5, which is going to be the 5th scale degree, which would be G in C major. So in this example, it's probably in C major. So I'm bouncing off of the G, but you could also have something in C major where you're bouncing off of the C, like this. So that can just be a way to make it sound a little bit more busy and frankly sound a little bit more complex than it really is. Because yeah, that doesn't sound complex, but it probably doesn't really sound as ridiculously simple as it is either. Another thing you can do with melodic is actually just have chords that go along with the melody, or seen another way, you could build a melody into a chord progression. So take something like this. So really that was just a chord progression from a C major to an F major, back to a C major to a G major, or a 1-4-1-5 in the context of C major. But you might have heard this melody within that chord progression. Super simple melody, but it is effective for making it more interesting than a traditional chord progression. So believe it or not, step 2 was actually the hardest step we have. So we either have a progression of broken chords, or perhaps just one broken chord, or some sort of melody in our right hand, or perhaps some melodic riff. Now the last thing to do is to simply have a left hand bass line. So before talking about writing the bass line, let's just talk about the 3 steps. Basically, figure out your key. Second step is to write a hook with your right hand, and then we are writing a bass line with our left hand. Now to make this third step easier to figure out what bass line would probably go well with your right hand hook, you might want to think about what chords are being implied or maybe outright played in your right hand. So let's take a simple progression of a 1 to a 4 where we came up with a broken chord pattern like this. Because we're implying a 1 chord and a 4 chord in C major, a C major chord, and an F major chord, we should keep that in mind when we are writing our bass line. So we could keep it really simple and just do the roots of the chords like this. Or we could do something slightly more interesting where we don't just use the roots of the chords, but use other notes in the chords, maybe something like this. Or we could have something slightly more interesting where we have other notes sort of fill in the bass line, maybe like this. And we could do the same thing with a melodic example. So maybe our right hand melodic hook was something like this. Then maybe we could pair it with a bass line like this. Now in that case, I tried to figure out what the underlying implied chords were in that right hand melodic hook. So let's analyze it really quick to give you some ideas as to how to figure out your left-handed bass line based on what you have in your right hand. So taking the first part, we have this. Now the reason we have that is because if we take the notes that we are using in the right hand hook, we have this. And this is heavily implying a C major chord with an added D. Or seen in another way, we simply have a C major chord with an add 2. So because 3 of the 4 notes are simply notes from a C major chord, we are going to have C in the bass to really hammer home, okay, this is basically a C major chord. And then the riff goes on to do this. So we have then these notes. Now these notes heavily imply a G major chord with an added C, or seen another way, a G major chord with an add 4. So because of that, we'll simply have G in the bass to really hammer home this is basically a G major chord. So if we take those first 2 parts and put them together, we get this. All right, so let's take the second half. We basically have the same riff we started with, which is this. So we could opt to simply go back to a C because again, we are implying a C major chord with an added 2. But in this case, I actually opted to go with an A instead because it makes it a little more interesting and it essentially makes it an A7 chord with an added D. Because the 3 notes of a C major chord are 3 of the 4 notes of an A7th chord. An A minor chord would be this, and an A minor 7 would be this. And if you notice, those top 3 notes are simply C major. So to keep it a little more interesting and add a little bit of dissonance, we'll go with an A in the bass this time. So putting everything together so far, we have this. And then finally, the last part of our right hand hook is this. Now, what chord is implied here is probably the most nebulous of all because we have all of these notes, which if we move them around, that gives us actually this. So really there isn't much of any chord being implied, so we get to have fun and try something until it works. Maybe now is when we think of, okay, what would work best in the bass? Do we like... And then will that work? That could work. Or maybe we have an F in the bass because that matches the main part of that melody. If you really just listen to the melody, it sounds like that F is really accentuated. So maybe we do that instead. That could work as well. So basically just make sure that whatever your bass line is, you are staying in the key. Utilize notes that you have in your key. If you're in C major, just make sure it's all of the white keys. That is the easiest way, especially if you don't know your keys. But also consider what chord is being implied by what I'm playing with my right hand. So again, 3 simple steps. Figure out your key, and if you don't know which key, or if you want the easiest of all, pick C major, then it's just all the white keys. Then write a right hand hook. If you want something super simple, you can simply do broken chords. Take whatever chord progression you may already have, or just come up with a chord progression and do broken chords. And then the third step is simply to come up with a bass line you can play with your left hand. And by the way, as a bonus tip here, you don't have to play the bass line with just one note. You could do octaves, or you could do fifths where you have the low note be sort of the bass line, and then you play a fifth above it where you are implying a chord, or you could use any other pattern in your left hand. But if you want to keep it really simple, just one note does perfectly fine. So writing a memorable piano riff doesn't have to be that hard. It can really be these 3 simple steps. And if you want to make this easier on yourself, be sure to check out my free keys cheat sheet. It's at songwritertheory.com/keys. It will give you for every single major and natural minor key, all of the notes in every key, and all of the main chords or the main triads, the major, minor, and diminished triads that you have in every single one of those keys. So if you want to write a song in C major or G major, but you don't know what notes are in it or what the main chords are, just grab this guide. It will literally give you the answers. It will tell you in G major, you have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and it will tell you all the chords built off of those notes. It will tell you the same for A major, E minor, B flat major, all of the different keys. So be sure to check that out, especially if you are needing help with, Joseph, I know you said C major and all the white keys, and that's simple enough, but what if I want to do it in another key? Be sure to check that guide out. Again, songwritertheory.com/keys. Thank you so much for watching. Now go out and write some killer piano riffs.